one of the purposes that I have in my office, I have this plaque that sort of says, "Remember the purpose." And I just added that plaque to my office about 6 months ago. And that came because I had a conversation with my niece, who's my sister, about my niece, who's about 4 years old. And my niece was out at the playground, and she was met a little boy, as kids do, and decided they wanted to play. And she said, "Can we play?" And the little boy was about 4 too, and he said, "Yeah, sure." She says, "Great, let's play the Three Little Pigs. You'll be the big bad wolf." He says, "I don't want to be the big bad wolves. How about we play hide and go seek?" She says, "Great, sure. I'll hide, you seek." So she runs off, he turns around, he counts, and he finishes, and he goes to find her. And he finds her hiding out in this tree on the playground, this sort of toy tree in the playground. And he said, "I found you," and she said, "Great, now blow the house down." The reason I say remember the purpose is that sometimes you have to remember exactly what it is you're doing, because pivots happen and people will try to change the game on you midstream. Supporting the Endless Frontiers, it's actually a pleasure to be here. I was just thinking back, when was the last time I was in Kentucky? The first time I was in Kentucky was probably about a little more than about 25 years ago. And I had the pleasure to be with my family in Paducah. And I don't know that I've been back in a while since. So I did get a chance to sample a little bit of Kentucky fare yesterday, thanks to Rick and the crew. I'm hoping to spend a few moments with you today discussing the Endless Frontier. And as many of you know, that's the vision that Vannevar Bush had for the National Science Foundation. Science, the Endless Frontier was the title. What I want to talk today about is how do we take that vision, that message, that dream, and continue to expand it in the current age. Let's put this in the big picture. So NSF, the current budget request to the President's budget request to Congress is $7.373 billion. That's an increase of about $340 million, and that's a little less than 5% over 2012 enacted. It's a request. The good thing is it shows an upward slope in funding. It shows a sustained commitment to science and basic research, and we're very pleased with that request. And we've actually had some movement in the Congress at this point on getting to a point of resolution, though we don't expect it. Who knows when we will see the final budget? But there's been very positive movement in Congress over the course of the last several months around the budget request. Someone who's been integral to my own life and work is the sort of creator of the dreamer of the National Science Foundation, Vannevar Bush, in his book Science, the Endless Frontier. I had the pleasure of sort of starting to understand more about Bush's life and time. He was very much the visionary. I don't know if many of you know that some of his early works were the predecessor to things that we call hyperlinks now. Through his work Memex, he actually envisioned through looking at microfiche, being able to use associative links, as he called it, to be able to connect through to resources that were not present locally. And in the 1950s, he had an idea for a dream for something that would help to focus all of the government R&D spending. He actually thought that the director of the National Science Foundation should report to a community of scholars, which would be the National Science Board. And the president at the time thought that no federal employee would report to anybody but the president. So that delayed the founding of the National Science Foundation for a few years, but we did actually see the dream become visualized. And his whole idea about how to catalyze innovation was really focusing on the lifeblood of the country. Talent development, a focus on basic research, and the universities. So what we're focusing on here is how do we build a better and stronger innovation ecosystem within the United States? And if you think back over the last 50 years, the U.S. has been an unbelievable engine of scientific and technological innovation. It's been a bastion of that for at least the last 50 years. And there are often people who put marks in the sand now to say, where are we and where are we going? Well, let's sort of take this as a reflection point and look backward in order to prepare to look forward. We have been, and hopefully continue to be, a magnet for scientific talent from around the globe. Continues to bring people here from all over. Up until this point, many people have chosen to build their lives and careers here after spending time in the United States. It's questionable whether or not that will be the case moving forward. So I put that as a point to think about. So we have been a magnet. We've been able to draw much of the talent. In fact, if you think about the HR, the human resource development within the science and engineering fields over the last so many years, it's not necessarily that we've been able to produce the best talent in the country. We have. It's not that but we've been able to produce and attract some of the best talent and retain that talent for the bulk of their careers. Will that be the case moving forward? And that's one of the questions that we think about within the foundation. And how do we make sure that that talent development continues to look like the nations, the states that are being served by science and engineering? Regardless of what you say, a few years ago, the Carnegie Foundation put out a report that talked about the rise of. Is anyone here from the UK? Not University of Kentucky, but from the United Kingdom. So I can say this. So it talked about the rise of the United Kingdom and the universities there, and what happened in the 1860s in the U.S. You mentioned the Morrill-Land-Grant Act and what that did to sort of create. There was a thought that truly great countries have to have truly great university systems, and you couldn't just export your very bright people to England and to other places in Europe. You really had to create great university systems here. People like Leland Stanford, Johns Hopkins, a number of great universities in this state formed out of the entrepreneurial efforts of philanthropists who were focused on private universities, and the U.S. government that decided to set aside funds to be able to fund the development of a truly great university system within the United States. And it continues to be at or near the top of global rankings. We just saw in India a few days ago that similar to the wonderful system of public-private universities that we have here in the U.S. that works so beautifully together to produce the talent that we have in this country and export talent to other countries, India is trying to determine how will they have a system that works together in such great harmony. Some of you may not think it's as harmonious, but it's harmonious, and it has a level of sort of transparency across the boundaries that is rivaled in many other parts of the world. And finally, how do we continue to maintain well-established infrastructure with institutions that have some sort of identity? We need to be able to identify, support. We need to be able to find talent, to nurture it. We need to make sure that we have strong elements of research integrity. And how do we start to protect things like IP? So this is all, if you think about what the innovation ecosystem in the U.S. is, these are the elements of the innovation ecosystem. Now, there's a three-body problem that's very different than for the physicist in the room. And I won't call it a problem, we'll call it an opportunity. One of the beautiful characteristics of the United States is the ability, this sort of unique models that exist, and many of you have been a part of in your own work and research, that the interplay between the university, the national labs, the national research infrastructure, and industry. And if you think of those as nodes that are brighter and darker at different points in time, many of the different collaborations that we are working on will have those elements. And we in the National Science Foundation have tried to put programs in place to continue to focus on the fact that dollars are, regardless of budget scenarios, if budgets are increasing or budgets are decreasing, dollars are scarce. Dollars are scarce. There are more great opportunities and problems than we have dollars to address. So we need to be able to leverage and collaborate in ways that continue to make these dollars purchase more and find more for their value. So I've talked to you about, at the highest level, about what the foundation is thinking about and some of the things we're grappling with. Let me drill down now to a more molecular level, and not necessarily in the true sense of molecules, but just to say to go from the big to the small. So by the numbers, if we look at the NSF and the U.S. Science Enterprise, often corporate organizations will produce something called efficiency ratios. They'll say, how many people do you have and how much output and work are you producing? Well, I don't know if it's some late nights, I don't know if I'm proud of this or not, but we're operating the National Science Foundation on less than 6% overhead. Right? So it's a very lean organization. It's about 1,500 employees that and there's no internal research, as you well know. But there are about 1,500 employees that are supporting about 285,000 individuals, and that goes across about 1,800 institutions. Last year, we received somewhere in the order of 40,000 proposals. You fund about 13,000 of those. So, and we call upon many of you to help us to figure out, to determine where we should place our, I don't want to say bets, but where we should make our investments, our wise investments and resources. So I give these numbers just to give you a sense of the scale of the enterprise. Right? And it's about, as we said, $7 billion. We have, on any given year, hundreds of thousands of people through the foundation to help us make these decisions. And we're continuing to think about how do we get better at doing that. One of the internal mechanisms that we have for One NSF is a new merit review working group. And we're thinking about new models of merit review. Are there ways to better use virtual panels? How do we make sure that we are able to include as many people as possible in helping to choose the directions for the future? The Graduate Research Fellows this year will celebrate its 50th anniversary. And we're proud to say that in excess of 46,500 graduate research fellows have been supported by the National Science Foundation since 1952. Now, you add that with the roughly 40,000 RAs that are supported each year, and you get a wonderful collection of people that are in the pipeline for great careers in STEM and STEM education. Now, let's look at some of the so that's the inputs. Let's look at some of the outputs historically. Around 200 people Nobel laureates have been supported by NSF since 1950. There are about 30 NSF research fellows that have been NSF that are Nobel laureates, and about 1% of the graduate research fellows have gone on to be members of like the National Academy of Sciences. We could do slices and dices of those in other ways, but it gives you a sense of what's happening early on. I was in a room about a year ago at the University of North Carolina, and I asked people to raise their hand. This is a group of entrepreneurs, small business. And I said, normally I go into a room and I have to tell people what the National Science Foundation is. How many people, and I label it this way, have been supported by, either as a PI or a graduate student, have served on a panel of the National Science Foundation, have received an SBIR, or in some way have touched the National Science Foundation? I think more than 2/3 of the room raised their hand. Now, I did it for a point, but I was floored, to be quite honest, that in this room of entrepreneurs, when we saw the hands go up in Research Triangle Park, so many people have been touched by the National Science Foundation. So it was the shortest talk I ever gave. I said, my work here is done, and I sat down. Some of you are wishing that I would have done that earlier. But the whole idea here is about economic impact. Let me give you a little more by the numbers. So if we look at the support of basic research, we like to say there are some fields for which if NSF didn't support it, it's questionable whether or not it would be supported. And that's not because of questionable quality, but it is where is the other source that's going to go in and to step in to support this. If you look at computer science, basic research, a huge fraction of that, 80%, over 80% supported by the National Science Foundation. And we are the only science agency that has a mission to support all branches of science, non-clinical medicine. You'll see that in biology excludes NIH. But this is also sobering to say of that $7 billion, these are the fields that we have to get our hands around. Now, I like to talk, so at dinner last night, someone asked me the question, well, so where are the dollars? What countries have sort of the growing dollars? And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about some initiative that we have called the Global Summit that just happened earlier this week. And if you think of the R&D research expenditure, the global R&D research expenditure, and in 2009, the last year for which we have data, right, for which we have full sets of data, or the most recent year for which we have full sets of data. If you look at the purchasing power and you normalize the parity, there's about $1.4 trillion of R&D spending in the U.S. And you can almost segment that into thirds of the world. The Americas have about a third, plus or minus a few percentage points. Right? And America is North America, Central America, and South America. South America is about 2% 2.5%. And that's actually a nice growing number. If you look in the middle of the third, it's Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And Europe, Middle East, and Africa collectively are probably about 30%, just under a third. So these are rough numbers, right? But just under a third. And the largest third, I know it doesn't make sense to say the largest third, but the largest of the three segments, let's say that, is the Asia and Asia Pacific. And those are areas that are, Southeast Asia. If you look at clearly the central points, you'll see there are central points in each of these areas. That's where the dollars are. Now, in some areas they're flat. We're seeing some tightening in Europe. We've seen a little bit. We've actually seen some stabilization in North America's and the U.S. and in Canada. But Europe is experiencing some of the same issues that we're hearing about in the news. And countries like China, I heard that the president was offered China making. So countries like China are investing. China and India are investing at record paces in the development of sort of STEM R&D. So that's something for us to be aware of. If we look in the last few years, countries like Korea, India, have all set up, and they've been very, very open with it, copies of the National Science Foundation. And they try to use that we like to call the gold standard of merit review. One of the things we have to think about is making sure that we continue the gold standard, but we also think about ways to make sure that the gold standard doesn't quell transformative or even, dare I say, disruptive ideas that may emerge. And we've got something to think about for that in just a moment. I'll say this really quickly. There's this world of ideas and patents. So if you look at what's happening in terms of patents, if you look at where people are filing and what's happening in the space, countries like Korea and Japan. Japan is questionable moving forward. This data is from it's from a report in 2011. But countries like Korea are continuing to put great emphasis on intellectual property protection as the outputs of even basic research. So we made one other observation. If you look at the number of valedictorians in high schools across America over the last few years, and you do a segmentation, let's make it a binary situation. It's either male or female. So raise your left hand if you think the proportion is greater for females. Raise your right hand if you think the proportion is greater for males. So males or females? All right. I see a lot of left hands, some right hands in there. So okay, we did get the system now. The proportion of valedictorians in the country is largely female and growing. The number is growing. If you look at the growth in doctoral recipients in STEM fields over the course of the last 5 years, there is, and you map that to the growth of PhDs of women scientists and engineers and mathematicians, it's almost a one-to-one map. So it's wonderful in the sense that there's growth. It's fantastic in the sense that that growth is happening in areas of the gender dynamic that we often thought were excluded from science and engineering. But it's scary to know that there's a sort of a stagnation from males who are getting involved in science and engineering. But if you think on the other end, how many women are staying in the pipeline, that's a really scary number. So the growth, the input is good. It's the output that we have to be concerned about. Now, that raises all sorts of questions. People ask the question, well, what do you mean by output? Because, it's just not tenure-track faculty positions. That's true. But we need to think about how many people are electing to stay in the workforce and are acting to stay as contributors in the STEM workforce in any aspect. not just in, I don't want to say not just, but not just as a tenure track professor, but in areas that support the STEM discipline, in all areas of the STEM discipline in the workforce. So these are the undergraduate degrees in natural sciences and engineering in 2008, the year for which we have information. About 1.43% of all U.S. bachelor's degrees are women engineers. So if you look at the United States in engineering, it's a small number, and there's lots of room to grow there. Lots of room to grow there. And one great area and potential for growth is continuing to foster this wonderful collection of women who've decided to major in areas such as science, technology, and engineering. And we started to think a little bit more about that as well within the foundation. So we are in an era, and we've often said it sort of feels like Leeuwenhoek puts out the first microscopes, and you see microbes, and you think, wow, it's a whole new world. Not a brave new world, that was Huxley, but a whole new world. This new era of observation is interesting in that we have new methods. We have to think about new ways for theory and experiment. We have to think about how does computation fit into our ability to understand what we observe, and that also rolls into data. We also have this great opportunity for citizen science. If walking around, I have more power in my pocket than we had in the early days of the space program. These in your hand can actually transform a classroom of elementary school students into data collectors. The idea of distributed sensors that are very inexpensive and the ability to collect information, and not only just to collect information, imagine partnerships across boundaries where students in the US are able to take pictures of the northern sky, and students in South Africa are able to take pictures of the southern sky, and we can do comparisons and better understand the cosmos. The era of data and communications is that we are often overrun with data. And our goal is to figure out how to better manage this data. I'm going to speed up here now just to say one of the things that I want to encourage is that we never want to, we are always focusing in the course. Often when I talk about these ideas and topics, people think, okay, that means you're going to take money from here to put it in there. And that's not at all what we're talking about. What we're thinking about is how do you look at the core and how do you make sure that the core continues to be protected, but you also find opportunities in the core to be leveraged across other areas. So core and multidisciplinary they're not antithetical. They can actually be very supportive. We continue to have a principled commitment to support of GRF. In fact, in last years when we were asked to think about where we might have to make tough decisions, we always said on matters of principle, it's extremely important to continue to support the development of science and engineering in the country. So we will continue to support graduate research fellowships. We'll continue to look at postdoc and career awards and young researchers. We'll continue to support our efforts in EPSCoR and continue to broaden, to do what we can for broadening participation. Global challenges that we're focusing on, many of you have heard of SIF 21, the National Robotics Initiative is a wonderful opportunity. NNI is something that's been around for the last 10 years, and we're starting to think about the next generations. Advanced manufacturing, so at one point we were a leader in manufacturing. I'm originally from Clinton, South Carolina, and when I was in the 3rd grade, I was told that Greenville, South Carolina was the textile capital of the world. And I remember being in the 3rd grade and thinking, of the world? It's just up the street. How's it the fact? Now if you walk around in Greenville, South Carolina, maybe a little bit different now, but 10 years after that, you could barely find some place that was manufacturing. As we move back into a world where manufacturing is important, we have to think about how do we build on that expertise that we've had for generations and continue to expand it to think about new and more advanced mechanisms for bringing manufacturing jobs to the United States and keeping them in the United States and not shipping out. We all know you lose something when you send something away. Even if it's just the experience of being able to produce it, there's something lost. How do we retain that within this country? So I want to focus in on SIF 21 for just a moment. SIF 21 is about a $200 million initiative that we have within the foundation. It's in the Office of Cyber Infrastructure. Someone asked me the question, where are we with SIF 21? Well, some of you may have seen, those of you who are in computing may have seen the Advanced Computational infrastructure document that came out. This is the pinwheel to the far right, or my far right, your far left. This document came out in January of this year, and it's the first of a series of documents that will hang down from the SIF 21 overview. We'll talk about grand challenges, we'll talk about scientific instruments, we'll talk about data, campus bridging, but the idea here is that we'll have these mini white papers that put out a vision for where we want to go in these areas. So I encourage all of you, if you're in the computational infrastructure area and you have not had a chance to read this, take a look at it. In some ways, it marks new directions. We have looked at big iron in the past, and we are now saying big iron is important, but also the infrastructure is important, and we want to be able to focus on the infrastructure. The opportunity for you in Kentucky and EPSCoR is to really think about how you use your time in EPSCoR and the work you're doing in EPSCoR as a pathway to tap into some of these other initiatives that are happening within the foundation, right? As a gateway to access to some of the facilities that we have around the country, and really to think about how to leverage dollars in a greater sense. We just launched the Sekuliak, which is a new research vessel in GEO. I'm going to take 5 minutes to talk to you about some initiatives, and then I'll take questions. PEER. PEER is an initiative that we joined in last July with the USAID. And our idea here is that there are things that we can fund that USAID can fund that we can't fund. And we've partnered to enhance research in developing areas, which USAID specializes in, and they are able to use dollars that we aren't able to. We do some matching there. This is Rajiv Shah and Subra Suresh came together and decided, let's try to find ways to better leverage. Our Office of International Science and Engineering is the office that's responsible for this. The next program is near and dear to my heart. How many of you have heard of Innovation Corps, the I-Corps? Okay, my work here is not done, right? So if you think of nothing else, so those of you who are concerned with economic development, I'm sure you're aware of the SBIR, STTR programs. I-Corps is a program that is very near and dear to my heart because it's my program. It's sort of a baby that the director and I one day sat down and sort of said, we should do something. And we looked at models around the country, and we tried to do something, and it's actually become quite successful. So it was launched last year, a few boundary conditions. How do we leverage $6 billion of foundation research and R&D for high-potential research outcomes? How to increase technological readiness? What are the factors that need to be in place to create an environment that's really intellectually rich and supports innovation? Post-peer research. Why should the U.S. National Science Foundation be concerned in these areas? What do we hope to achieve? And the final question everyone's got to ask is, does it work? So we like to talk about something, my term is the ditch of death. And you'll understand the ditch of death in just a moment, but our goal is to make sure that research doesn't stop. Some research that needs to move out of the laboratory has the opportunity to move out of the laboratory. We want to focus on increasing network opportunities, and most importantly, the why is that it's really integral to the strategy of the National Science Foundation, the strategic vision. So it's six months. It's about a $50,000 award. It's at least 3 team members. There's an entrepreneurial lead who's usually a postdoc or a student who's looking to move, the one who's looking for their next gig, right? There's the PI who has a job, right? The researcher with the current or previous award. And then there's the I-Corps mentor, someone who's been out in the industry, who's done it before, right? So this is someone who has started an organization, who understands the pains and the pitfalls. Our idea here is that this has to be built on, this is not completely new money, right? This has to be built on an existing NSF award. So some of these ideas have $1 million of investment in them already. So the why should we do it is because we've already made the investments. And it's almost like you get to the end and you have a gut feeling that there's something special there, but you don't know quite what to do. And it's not really research anymore, but it's not quite ready for prime time. And you just kind of, over a cup of coffee, think, how do I do this? Well, what we're doing is giving a little bit of education, a little bit of catalytic dollars, and some time, and requiring some time, and we hope that we'll be able to make a difference. So in fiscal year 2011, we made 25 awards. Our goal is by the end of this fiscal year to have 100 awards, and we'll be able to make some announcements around that soon. The one thing you should know is that there's a max F&A on this of about $5,000, 10%, $5,000. And the reason we do that, not a slippery slope, the reason we do that is because, remember, this is building on already 100, usually on the order of $500,000 to $300,000 to $1 million of research that was at full overhead. Ditch of death. So the EPSCoR home is in this space in our programs that are just at the end of the lab. It's not quite the valley of death. In fact, it's far left of the valley of death, but it's in the core areas of what we're doing within the foundation. How do we leverage our dollars more to make sure that these things, it doesn't ensure success. In fact, all we're doing is saying, let's give this idea a chance to die in the valley of death. So let's get it out of the ditch and let's push it. It's almost sadistic, right? Let's get it out of the ditch and let's push it towards the valley. And we have mechanisms for trying to save things in the valley of death, but there's a great deal of capacity that's sitting in reports and research products now that we like to unleash. So sometimes when you ask the question, does it work? And the truth of the matter is we don't have all the data yet. We're still in the first year. We're sort of trying to figure out what happens with the group of people that have gone through the program. But the wonderful thing that we have here is in terms of developing a network is that we will have at the end of this 100 mentors, somewhere on that order, who have gone through this program. We've actually seen venture capitalists who are helping to teach and judge this that said, I saw an idea, and actually I'm going next week to look at the final presentations of the group that we started about 6 months ago. The VCs are saying, when I saw this company in the beginning, it was a couple people from the lab, and they brought this thing in, and they said, this is a great business, we're going to do X. Now remember, a great idea is not necessarily a great business, right? A great idea is a good idea, but it's got to have a market, there's got to be some application for a business. And the first gentleman there that you said that was talking about $50K, and it was only $50K, I don't know if I should do it, he spoke at our engineering advisory committee, not the last one, but the one before. And it was great. He is this ERC director in New England. He had a lab within his ERC that wasn't going to get any funding anymore. And he was telling them, it's time to start to think about where you're going to go, what you're going to be when you grow up. And they said, well, we've got this technology, and we think it's great, and it's wonderful, and it can apply here. Good idea, but there was no market. They went through this program and actually started to talk to people. And the idea is that you have to get out of the lab. You have to actually talk to customers and see if not this, another place. And it's actually a brutally honest, it's not for the faint of heart. It's a brutally honest engagement that I think seems to be working. So by the end of this, they now had shifted their technology, which did something with the transmission across the membrane. And they realized that there was a huge market out there that they never would have thought about, cosmetics. And now they've moved from sort of a dying center that was charged by their center director to figure out what you're going to do, to an organization that's got a postdoc who, when I first met him, I don't know that the guy said 2 words. And now he's sort of in this more engaging mode, and he's actually thinking about moving this forward after this. So I'll take that as just an anecdote to say it's too early to say, does it work? But what we can say is it does appear to be working. And from the community, from the participants, and even from members of Congress, we've actually gotten lots of interest in this area. Now, it's a small program. The first year was $5 million with a matching. It's a public-private partnership with the Kauffman Foundation and the Deshpande Foundation of Kansas City and Boston, respectively. But it's a really powerful partnership. And the next year, the proposal is about $20 million. So small, but hopefully impacting. And that's the idea, that you can have small amounts of money that make a difference. The last 2 programs, NSF Career Life Balance Initiative, we launched this last year with the First Lady. And our focus here is on making sure that we have family-friendly practices in place, not just for women, but also it's gender neutral. People can take advantage of it. We believe that a disproportionate percentage of women will probably take advantage of this. It addresses the issue that I was talking to earlier. I don't want to say disproportionate. A larger proportion of women will probably take advantage of this. It addresses the issue that I talked to earlier about how do you make sure that for reasons of wanting to start, maintain, grow a family, that you don't have people just be forced out of the pipeline, out of the academic pipeline, or out of the STEM pipeline. So this has things like no-cost extensions, freezing the clock on your award. So some really interesting opportunities here to try to create a family-friendly environment. And we've actually adopted that within the foundation as well. Science across virtual institutes. This is an opportunity to find glue dollars, I would say. Research that's happening on a large center level in another country. Research here, we've married those up and tried to find sort of catalytic dollars to create something in the interstices that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I'd encourage you, if you have been thinking about how do you sort of, if you are starting to engage with and these are not one-to-one collaborations, right? We do those all the time, those happen. But if we're thinking about things, for instance, we had some institutes in India in mathematics. We had a center that we funded at Brown University in mathematics. If we can bring those things together, the two centers are at larger levels than the individual PI. The PI relationship is important. Can we get something that is more transformative and better leverage? And that's what the Science Across Virtual Institutes is all about. I'll say Inspire, and then I'll end with the Global Summit. Inspire is a new award that we have implemented that really looks at how do you find transformative research? How do you find research across multidisciplinary boundaries? And those words often sort of scare people, but remember we talked about transformative and disruptive and making sure that we have mechanisms to not have those quelled in some might argue, in the conservative environment that might exist in the traditional gold standard. It still has to go through a gold standard review, but if you can actually get other people in the same room, experts, to think about, well, yeah, no, but I understand it may not make sense only in biology, but what she's saying is if you look across these two areas, then yeah, it's sort of risky, but we might fund that. So how do you make these kinds of investments wisely and build mechanisms in to make sure that they continue to grow and prosper? And that's what Inspire is all about. A new program last year, growing this year. And I'll end with this point. So I had a graph in the middle that was on global R&D expenditures, $1.4 trillion. We had major representation from that room, from the people controlling those dollars, all gathered together for the first time at the National Science Foundation just 2 days ago. So I'm still on the great euphoria of getting all these folks together. About 2 years ago, the director had the idea. He was asked on the second day of the job to think about hosting a meeting. And in that meeting, over many conversations, morphed into, let's actually get together 48 of the 50 top research funding agencies focusing on largely STEM basic research. Let's get them to the foundation, and let's talk. But let's not get them to the foundation and talk for the first time. Let's have regional engagement throughout the year preceding so that when we get together and talk, we can actually do something. Novel idea. So we add regional engagement in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, Asia, basically the 3+ areas that we talked about earlier in the segmentation. They all came together on Sunday for a reception, Monday and Tuesday of this week for the first time, and they launched something called the Global Research Council. Now, what does that mean for Kentucky? What does that mean for the U.S.? What it means is that if you look at those expenditures, we have more, and at the event, the science advisor, John Holdren, said when he was first asked to take on this role, the president told him, we have more issues and opportunities than we have dollars. Whether we like it or not, we're going to have to collaborate. And he meant that across boundaries in the government and across geographical, political, national boundaries as well. That wasn't necessarily just our motivation, but our motivation is understanding that we do have to find ways to leverage. We do have to find ways to make our dollars go as far as we can. And that's what the Global Research Council was about. It was about looking at developed and developing countries. We had 3 countries. It wouldn't have come together if they had not been asked by the National Science Foundation. That's actually a powerful convening power. And I'll say that what we hope to do is this Global Research Council is not a funding agency now, but the idea is to standardize principles. There's 6 basic research principles that were agreed to, principles for merit review. Next year, they're going to take up scientific integrity and open access to publications and data, and that will probably be a multi-year effort. The goal is hopefully within the next 5 years, can we get to the point where we actually know what, we can have a partnership with the publishers and ourselves on how we access data. And the benefit to Kentucky is that we can improve not just our access, but we can improve our access to data, we can improve our access to dollars, we can improve our access to better research. Because issues in any one space impact all of us. So that's my presentation. One NSF is where we're focusing now. A few minutes for questions, if you have them. So a great question. So the Global Research Council, the idea there is that it's a body that has, It's a completely virtual body. It has a rolling secretariat. So we hosted the U.S. hosted the meeting this year. Brazil and Berlin, Brazil and Germany will host the meeting in Berlin next year, May 27th, 28th, and 29th. And the goal will be, over the course of time, let's really focus on the issues at a high level that are important to all of us. Let's not get to small issues that we can deal with locally. I mean, if there's an issue in Chile, that's great. That's a Chilean issue. But if there's an issue in Chile that makes sense for all of us to think about at the global level, we should. So if you look at the 6 principles, it can't be mom and apple pie, but there are things that we all can agree to. But it's important to be able to say that for developing countries, because we need to make sure that there's a solid base on which these countries are building. Brazil is growing at a nice clip, the 2.4% that we saw there now, and it's rising. How do we make sure that that foundation is there? So it will be something that happens as you rotate around countries. There were 50 that gathered just logistically. We had a room that could only hold 50 at the foundation. We expect that there'll be somewhere in the order of 100 next year. My email address is just dacarter@nsf.gov. I'll take one more question, and I know they want me to get off the stage.
Access to scientific journals is becoming a serious problem all across the country. Publication costs, layoffs, library budgets being cut. Does NSF anything about it, or are they aware of the problem? Is there anything that NSF can do to assist the problem?
Oh, I'm sorry. So the first question was about the rollout of the Global Research Council, and this question was about the cost of scientific journals, access to scientific journals. That cost is going up. That's definitely something that we've talked about at our senior management meetings regularly. We meet as a senior management team once a week, long meetings. We meet as a senior management team once a week on Tuesdays, and one of the things we do is try to look at topics of future importance. This topic of open access to publications, open access to data is a really pressing one. So important that we actually asked the Global Research Council to think about this on a global level, because it's not just a U.S. problem, as we all know. This is a problem that affects us globally. So it's a great topic for the Global Research Council. We think it'll be something that takes 5-6 years for us to really get to the point of being able to address. But we aren't strayed away from those, because if we put a plan in place that makes a difference in the next 5 years, we've made a difference. Right? Thank you all very much. Hopefully I didn't bore you too much.